This is Inside City Hall, the official podcast of the City of Oregon City. I am your host, Communications Manager Jared Lyman. If you've listened to the show before, you probably noticed it sounds a little different. That's because we've got this great partnership with Willamette Falls Media Center, and they're allowing us to use their broadcast studios to produce the podcast. And also an added benefit of that, you can watch us on YouTube. I apologize now. The voice isn't the only thing that my parents said was better for radio, so you may not want to watch it, but it's an opportunity if you want to on the city's YouTube channel. I figure the best way to kick off the new podcast format and the new year is for our city manager, Tony Konkol, to join us. And I've managed to wrangle some time out of his schedule. Tony, I appreciate you taking the time to come in today. Let's just dive right into it, because last week you gave a speech to the Oregon City Business Alliance. It's an annual thing that we do, kind of recapping the prior year and talking about some of the things to come this year. But of course, this year was a little bit of an interesting start. We kind of lost a week there with the ice storms. It was a really interesting situation, but honestly, I have to say the way that the team pulls together to try to keep those roads as clear as possible during this weather is really impressive, and that's something that you've also expressed some being proud of the way the city handles that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you, Jared, for this opportunity to be able to participate in this podcast. Had another kind of long week there with some unexpected weather, some cold temperatures. From an operational standpoint, we've really gotten pretty good at knowing where our issues are going to be, what hills are going to be some of the more dangerous, that they're going to ice up sooner, be more slippery, tend to have more accidents. So our public works staff, our police department, our parks and rec staff are able to get out there ahead of time, prepare the areas. You'd see road closure signs staged and ready to go for when or if that event happens. We meet regularly, monitoring road conditions, monitoring weather forecasts, making sure that we have crews are ready to go and staged. So really a lot of pre-planning goes into making sure that event itself is addressed to the best way that we can.
A lot of people were really enthusiastic about the way the city handled the emergency, but as always, there's some people who have questions and so forth, and we get that. It's not easy to keep the roads clean as people think. There's a lot of variables that go into what the crews have to deal with, one of which being, did it rain beforehand, did it not? Applying de-icer, applying sand, and so forth. What are all these things that Public Works has to take into account when determining how to respond to these winter weather incidents?
Yeah, I think one of the main things is just how the event comes in. Snow is a little bit easier to deal with than ice. Rain beforehand really limits our ability to prep the roads for the event. So, if it's raining, turning into ice, we can't put down de-icer because it just washes away. So ideally, we want kind of drier conditions leading up into an event so we can get de-icer down that helps break down that snow event or that ice event when it happens. I think some of the other things is that, we really, plowing's not effective until we get accumulation of snow. A half inch of snow really isn't something we're going to plow. I think the other thing that's important is that we don't plow every road in Oregon City. We don't have the resources. We don't have the trucks. We don't have the plows. So really, it's focusing on those main arterials and secondary roads to make sure that if you can get from your local road to a Malala Avenue or a 7th Street, or a Main Street, those are it's really us focusing on making sure those main arterial roads for transportation, for police and fire, to get to the hospital. Those are our priorities during those events.
And another thing that people don't necessarily realize is the fact that people look at, the Midwest or whatever. It's like, well, when I lived in the Midwest, they had everything. That's regular for them. Pretty much no city in Oregon, at least on this side of the Cascades, has the type of equipment inventory that other cities where this happens all winter long. It's kind of hard to maintain an inventory like that for something that maybe happens once a winter.
Correct.
So, I mean, the amount of resources it would take would really limit the other things that our street crews can handle, correct?
Yeah, when you think about, how often we have to de-ice or plow, it really wouldn't make sense economically to invest in a huge fleet of plows and de-icers. It would, in looking at how we spend the public funds responsibly and accountable for how those funds are spent, having a fleet that maybe gets used once a year, maybe twice, it's hard to justify balanced against all the other needs that happen on a much more frequent basis, such as large rain events, dealing with our stormwater system, making sure that we don't have grates overflowing, those things that we see on a more typical nature. Do we ever get to a position where you have snow for a longer period of time that changes that discussion? Maybe, I don't think we're like the east side of the state where you have areas that have snow for months on end that has to be dealt with snow events that happen regularly. So it is a little bit of difference. It's a one-off event that seems to be happening a little more frequently, but not to the extent where it's all of a sudden we're going to go buy 5, 6, 7 plows to try to keep up with an event that happens with pretty infrequent nature, as well as we tend to see more of an icing event, which is very, very different to address than a typical snow event that you'd see in other areas.
And I want to go add into that because this is on top of everything else that's happening at the Public Works Department. And that's something actually that came up as well during the OCBA luncheon was that there's a lot of really big projects that some of which may have started a couple years ago. But as you said, when these projects are supposed to last 2, 5, 10 years, that 2-year biennium window is actually kind of small. So there's a lot of stuff that's actually going to come into this phase in the next year or so that is going to go from planning to something that's going to be very visible to the community, one of which is the water main project on Malala. And that has a whole interesting story. So kind of explain what that is and how that all came to be.
Sure. So I think that the finance department as well as the public works department put together a very compelling project list that was very competitive at the federal level for grant funding or loan funding from the federal government. It's called the WIFIA project for water infrastructure projects. We got approved about $33 million worth of projects, of which we took out a very favorable termed loan with the federal government for about half of that money. And what that does is, as these projects have gotten more complex, much more large in scale as well as cost, it's very, very difficult to just do these smaller little $1 million, $2 million projects. As many of you know, in Oregon City, we also have a requirement that we must go out to the voters if we're going to take on any debt. So what that means is, as these projects get bigger, we either save up enough cash to pay for them as we go. So if we have a $6 million, $7 million, $8 million project, we need to save that money up before we can actually do the work. So by going out to the voters and being approved to be able to take on this debt, which is the loan from the federal government, it does allow us to do more substantial projects at scale, which saves time, saves money. But through that, you're going to see improvements in what is called our SCADA system. So it monitors, how our water's flowing, what the pressure is, and providing cybersecurity protections for that wireless system that is really, part of the brains of how we control water pressure and flow throughout the community from our reservoirs through our system to your faucet. The second part of that is really dealing with some of our old infrastructure. We're the oldest city, and we have some of the oldest infrastructure. And so part of this funding will be addressing those pipes that have long outlived their design life as well as their capacity. So bringing those improvements in well. And then the third part is really addressing some of our major water lines that are kind of the backbone of our system. So we are part owners of South Fork Water Board with the city of West Lynn. So South Fork Water Board brings the water out of the Clackamas, treats it, and then distributes it to our reservoirs in Oregon City as well as the reservoirs in West Lynn. So really that backbone that really gets the water from South Fork to the reservoir and then from the reservoir back to the distribution system is a really important component of our water system. And so significant investment is going to be made in providing and upgrading that water line that serves the reservoir, as well as we're working to upgrade our reservoirs. We've purchased a site. We're looking for additional funding for the construction of another reservoir to help serve as our community continues to grow.
And that growth is water is probably one of the biggest contingencies on what allows for that growth, I would imagine. When you're looking at increasing capacity, increasing flow, and so forth, how does the city balance all of that in terms of also dealing with the impact of construction? How does that all get managed so that you can provide the services the residents need at the same time as trying to minimize the amount of negative impact they might have on their daily commute or something?
Sure. And I think that's always a tough balancing act. I think we've gotten better. We understand that these large infrastructure projects, especially when they're on our main corridors, are extremely impactful to the businesses, to our residents. Um, I think we've done a better job as a city of trying to, one, communicate that these improvements are coming, what the construction schedule is going to be. I think we've also done a really good job of trying to work with the contractor in terms of when's the best timing for this. So, you'll start to see requests for working at night, trying to minimize the impact on the daily commute or the rush hour commute that happens, as well as trying to make sure that we get larger sections done at one time, trying to speed up that process as much as we can so we can reduce the impact of the improvement. But they're big jobs. There's no doubt about it. They're in our main corridors, and anybody who lives in Oregon City or travels through knows, we don't have a typical grid system where it's easy to reroute folks around these projects when they're on a Malala, they're on a Seventh. Those are kind of the heart of our transportation system as well as our infrastructure system.
One other thing, you mentioned the cost having to go out for financing and so forth. How big of a problem or has it been with the inflation? Residents are dealing with it as well, but a lot of people don't realize the city deals with that as well, and that's constantly causing us to adjust our estimates, adjust the scope of some of these projects of what we can actually accomplish.
Sure. I mean, typically, in a typical year, you'll see, maybe wages go up or, maybe construction prices go up. Since COVID, it's kind of been all things have been going up. Wages have been going up, construction prices have been going up, material prices have been going up, and going up significantly. I think we've definitely turned the corner and started to see those prices start to flatten. We've seen more bids coming in at lower prices than our engineering estimates for the first time in years. So, I think that, we definitely deal with these costs just as an individual does. And that means, yes, prioritizing what limited funds we have to invest, making sure that we're maximizing that investment to get the project that we need. And sometimes there are projects that just can't get done just because of the inflationary pressures that have gone into some of these projects. But they're still priorities; they'll still stay on the list. It'll just take us a little bit longer to get to some of those.
When you were talking about the main water line project, you mentioned the SCADA and some of the internet type of infrastructure that controls this. And when people think infrastructure of a city, they think roads and water and so forth. But what they don't realize is increasingly that digital infrastructure is really a key component of how pretty much anything operates nowadays, but a city as well.
Mhm.
So, how has the city been prioritizing the digital infrastructure? What are we doing there moving forward to try to continue to keep up with the necessary impacts and needs and technology?
Yeah, definitely. Over the years, we've definitely seen how IT really has evolved from some servers and a network to store some files and provide email to really being the backbone of a jurisdiction, both internally and externally for communication, distribution of information, backing up information, whether it's finance, human resources, public works, police department. Everything relies on technology, and that not only needs to be accessible, but it also needs to be secure. So really, what we've been doing with our IT department is, beginning with how do we make sure that we have a secure network? Um, what are those things that we can do to harden the system? We get daily malware, infrastructure, cyber attacks constantly. I don't think people realize that. that it is a constant attack on the system to try to gain entry to it. So really it's, okay, how do we make sure that we are hardening our system while at the same time backing it up so that if something does happen, our information is protected and can be restored as quickly as possible. And then from there, you build on, what are the things that we can do from a training standpoint for our employees to make sure that they're aware of what these phishing scams look like, what these malware attacks look like. And then from there, it's building that network so that it's resilient, it's compartmentalized. So moving to a cloud-based system for all of our systems, for our network. So really, it's a migration as the technology changes to both be as efficient as we can, but also as secure as we can in that process.
You brought up a really good point there with the backups and being able to restore things, and the city experienced that last year in a network incursion type event. It was really interesting and exciting and rewarding to see how the staff handled that and continued to provide service to the residents. But one of the things that came about of that is, this is something that we're seeing in the headlines happening to government entities on an almost daily basis. So Oregon City was definitely not alone in this, but how we handled and how we recovered has been used a lot as kind of an example of the way to do things, correct?
Yes, I think when we started investing in our IT network, like I said, the first thing was, how do we, how do we deal with a disaster recovery event, whether that's a cyber attack, an earthquake, some major event that's going to be disruptive to our network. And so, one of the things that we invested in was, a complete backup of our system that happens on a routine basis, which then gave us the ability when we did have the ransomware attack, and we were able to essentially disconnect from the internet world, um, go through, identify what had happened, but once we were assured and confident that we understood what happened, the threat had been neutralized, we had the ability then to start backing up our own network without engaging with the hostile ransomware attacker who came into our system demanding a ransom. So yeah, it was rewarding from that. It pointed out some great things that we did, but it also pointed out some of the weaknesses that we have that we're continuing to focus on to try to harden our system against, those future attacks, which will occur. The speed at which the technology changes, both for good and bad, is actually quite astonishing how quickly that happens.
And we gotta give credit to our IT department as well, because they've actually been invited to speak at several conferences about this, and I think one of them was the good, the bad, and the ugly,
Yeah.
and we were the good. So I mean that always feels pretty nice to be part of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, definitely shout out to our IT department. David Knoll was our IT manager for years, who I worked with hand in glove to try to, start moving us from providing GIS and mapping to providing in-house IT services for the entire city. And then right before that ransomware attack, we hired our first IT director, Mike Debai, did a great job with the team over there in responding to that event. I think one of the biggest compliments I heard about that event from external folks was, that nobody even really realized it happened. Right. So I think that's the testament to the customer service that we provide with our employees, was that even though essentially our permitting system, our financing system, we shut everything down. We were able to still function as a city, right? We're handwriting checks. We haven't done that in a long time, but having those systems in place to be able to continue to function when you lose a major component of your infrastructure is just as important as well. And so, like I said, I think that's a testament to the staff, their customer service skills, their understanding of what we need to accomplish, and coming up with innovative ways to do that. I think that's probably part of the good, the bad, and the ugly, is that it's not just, how do you harden your system? How do you recover from this event? But what do you do when you don't have those systems in place, right? It's really that contingency planning to be prepared for, how are we going to, cut checks to employees and to vendors? How are we going to track our time? How are we going to process permits that come in the door, right? We can't just stop in our tracks as we deal with this event.
Yeah, and our community development team, they really did some phenomenal stuff in terms of going back to, I wouldn't say the Stone Ages, but technology might qualify as that,
Right.
and continuing to do stuff, pen and paper, keep those records handy. So then when the systems did come back, we were able to just get everything going. And as you said, a lot of the people in the community didn't even realize something had happened.
Right, which is great.
Moving on to one of the other things that we talked about during, or you talked about during the luncheon, was the quiet zone. That's
Mhm.
something that's been a topic of discussion for a while now. And I needed the education, so I'm going to assume maybe some other residents out there do as well. I didn't understand why a quiet zone with the railroad would require so much investment. I thought we just tell the trains to shut up coming through the town, and they do. But there's actually a lot more to that.
Correct. Yeah, so, I think one of the things what triggered this was this desire for additional investment, particularly from a residential standpoint in our downtown. Right now, I think we have somewhere between 30 and 35 or 36 trains go through our downtown on a daily basis, both freight and commuter. As they approach, for example, 10th Street crossing at the bottom of Singer, there's a requirement that they blow their whistle multiple times. So the two pedestrian vehicular crossings that we looked at, where there is this requirement for the whistles to be blown, are at 10th and 11th. And so working with ODOT Rail, our urban renewal agency, we were able to secure a $2 million earmark to go towards the project. This was back in, I think, 2019, 2020, when we initially scoped the project. We had an estimate of about $2.6 million, so $2 million from the federal government, $600,000 from urban renewal / the city to implement these safety improvements. So really, as a quiet zone's implemented, instead of the train laying into the whistle 3 or 4 times coming up to the intersection,
Or one long time through
or
the
one
entire
long
town.
time, yeah. Really, the requirement for the conductor, the engineer to blow the whistle is removed because there is a warning system at the actual intersection. So what those typical improvements are include, longer gate arms so that someone in a vehicle can't skirt around them. Additional micro or speakers at the intersection on the rail arms so that pedestrians or bikers are aware. Essentially the whistle, the horn gets localized at the actual crossing location. There would also be pedestrian improvements to make sure people, if you got your AirPods in, right, if you're not paying attention, right, that there are, other warning systems so that you're actually aware, that, this is a heavy rail Amtrak crossing. So that all those go into those safety requirements for the 10th Street and the 11th Street pedestrian and vehicular crossing areas. 11th is only pedestrian, 10th is obviously bike, ped, and vehicle. But the challenges have been, multiple years later. We talked about this a little bit earlier. The costs of everything have gone up. We did go back, and we just recently signed the initial scope of work to bring on the contractor with the Oregon Department of Transportation. Because it's federal money, the city actually can't process this. So we have to work through ODOT Rail as the project manager because they can handle those federal funds. So we're going to do a check-in once they get the contractor on board. We get better cost estimates as to what this cost is going to be. We applied a construction factor to it going back several years. I think it was another $600,000 over the initial estimate. So we're going to check that in a couple months to see where we're at. It'll probably take longer than that. I'm hoping we have a contractor on in a couple months. Then we'll go through more refined design work, engineering estimate, see where we're at, and if the investment still makes sense based on the proposed price. ODOT is telling us probably about 2 years for that project to get completed.
Another project kind of in that same vein, part of the urban renewal thing, is the Cove. And that's something that's been a source of conversation for quite some time as well. Can you kind of go into what that is, where we're at, what we might be looking at in the future?
Yeah, sure. So the Cove, has gone through a couple options there for some development, some mixed-use development, office, residential. But the conversation has kind of changed to, what can we do to make sure that we maintain the water quality in Clackamas Cove? We've had a handful of blue-green algae blooms over the last several years. And so the discussion's really been, are there improvements that we can make to protect that water body from not only a natural water quality standpoint, but also, a lot more people are using that for recreational opportunities with kayak, stand-up swimming during our warmer days. So, we've been working quite a bit. We visited Lake Oswego. Their lake core deals with a very similar type situation of a water body that doesn't get a lot of water movement, tends to get kind of warm because of the depth of the lake itself, and how they've managed the blue-green algae blooms there, both through aeration as well as chemical treatment in there. And so, we've been asked to start looking at, what can we do? Are there improvements that can be made? Are there ways to increase flows into the cove? Are there ways, could we add aeration? Would that be a benefit to help reduce this blue-green algae event that happens occasionally in that water body? Are there other things that can be done? So right now, really the focus is on how can we improve the water quality of that water body for multiple reasons, and what those measures may be, as well as trying to get an understanding of what's actually causing these blooms to happen. Is there something in the soil in there? Is there some type of a high nutrient load coming in from the stormwater pipes that enter into the cove? Is there a high nutrient load that comes down from higher up in the Clackamas River that's being deposited in there, that then when the temperatures rise and the water flows go down causes these blooms to happen? So, part of it is understanding the cause so that you can create a solution to address it.
So obviously, there's a lot of moving parts on this, and there's a lot of ifs that have to be determined. But the work is ongoing, and if I recall, there was a recent meeting where some of the next steps were discussed by the commission on how we're moving this project forward.
Yeah, we worked with our consultant to come up with a scope of work that we would then put out through a request for proposal or a request for qualification process. There's been some desire for us to work with some of the community groups who've done some work and have expertise through their professions with, like, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife or Division of State Lands. So, really trying to make sure that we get a scope that everybody's comfortable with before we go out and start that work.
Moving on to another topic that probably comes up in many conversations around Oregon City is homelessness, and this is something you addressed during this speech as well. Um, the recent weather event really, I think, probably shown even a brighter spotlight on this than there is other times because of the sensitivity, the vulnerability of this population. And this is something that you feel very strongly about, and really, I think, spoke passionately about during the speech. And I would like the podcast audience to be able to hear those thoughts as well. If you could kind of share your thoughts on what happened, what needs to happen, and what some of those options are.
Sure. I think, homelessness continues to be a topic of discussion. And as I said at the Oregon City Business Alliance presentation, I realize that there are strong opinions, feelings on both sides of this, right? We spend too much money. We don't spend enough money. We do too much. We do too little. I don't want it here. We should be doing more. This is a community that's here, right? So, trying to balance all those as the city manager, and I've said this during this presentation. These are my opinions as the city manager of trying to deal with this on a daily basis. There are we can always strive for what we would want things to be, right? But then there's also the reality of what is, right? And I have to work a lot in the what is, right? What is happening right now in our community, to our businesses, to our residents, to our homeless community that's here, and how do we come up with tools and programs to improve that, which has been hard. We're balancing community demands, lawsuits, court decisions that limit what we can and can't do or mandate what we have to do. So, finding that balance is tricky, right? And so really, during that event, and I point no fingers at any organization here. We can't do this alone, and I appreciate all the help that they've brought, whether that's Father's Heart, Love One, our police department, Clackamas County Health and Human Services, Clackamas Community College. I think they did commendable work responding to an event with the resources that they had available to them. But during that event, I was extremely disappointed that at one point, Father's Heart in Oregon City was the only homeless shelter open to deal with the community members in need during that event. Like that's a failure. That we can be better than that. And I applaud those organizations that I mentioned. Clackamas Community College worked with the county and Father's Heart and Love One to spin up additional beds in space at Clackamas Community College. I mean, had to do it. It's great. Supported 100%. But, these other jurisdictions should be prepared to handle these for their homeless community members that are there. Father's Heart isn't the should not become the only place in Clackamas County where other jurisdictions just say, I don't have to deal with this. I'm just going to send folks there. It's just not how this is going to work. It's not fair to Oregon City. It's not fair to your homeless community members in your community and telling them tough, go to Oregon City.
Especially at a time when public transit was almost at a standstill
Yeah.
because of the same icing event.
Yeah, we're dealing with, horrible travel conditions, mass transit that's not working. It was a very, very, very difficult event to kind of navigate through from that standpoint. Unfortunately, honestly, we weren't hit as bad as some of the other areas, right? I mean, this was not nearly as bad of an icing event as 2 years ago when we got hit with the ice storm in terms of damage that we saw, but it was still a significant cold event that we typically do not see in this part of the region. So out of that discussion, is, what can we do? Some of the things that we're looking at, we've historically kind of, in my opinion, led the charge for smaller jurisdictions in addressing this. We're the county seat for Clackamas County. We have the jail here. We have a lot of services that are here. And with that becomes the largest homeless population in the county, located in the Oregon City area. And so, we initially invested in a homeless liaison officer to be that contact for businesses and residents that are being impacted and with our homeless community, and being that resource who has the expertise and knowledge and relationships to get folks to the resources that are available and needed. Working with Love One, with Father's Heart, we're working with and beginning the discussions with the Homeless Solutions Coalition of Clackamas County. They bought Miles Fiberglass. And really the idea is that you have these resources, but you have to go to each of them if you are a resident in need. And if we could consolidate these, I believe it's going to be more efficient and more successful, right? Instead of saying, go up to, Clackamas County to get your birth certificate, then you can go to the DMV to get your driver's license, and then you can go to Social Security office and get your Social Security card, so that then maybe we can take you to see if you qualify for any benefits. And then over here, you can deal with your mental health and hopefully get in to see a doctor to help, or a caseworker, while we're trying to get you into housing, right? Me with a car is going to struggle to do that in an efficient manner, in a timely manner, right? And if we can take those services that are all there doing the work and consolidate them and have someone come in and walk them through. And this isn't to say that, the Miles Fiberglass is going to be the location where all the mental health services are going to be, because it's not. It's really going to be more of like a triage center that says, okay, you have A, B, and C, and we can help you get those things lined up. You're in a crisis mode. We're going to get you to a location right now to help with this acute crisis. And so, there's been a lot of misinformation, a lot of fear, and I understand that, right? I get it. But, we've invited the Homeless Solutions Coalition to come present to the City Commission on February 7th, Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. I invite anyone on either side of the issue, for, against, concerned, supportive, to come to that meeting, or at least watch online, or just hear what the proposal actually is. And then we can begin to have that discussion of how do we get ahead of this, right? Because there will be impacts, right? There will be negative impacts. So how do we plan for those and be proactive rather than waiting for them to happen and be reactionary without any plan?
And I think you kind of touched on the one key thing there is, there is going to be impacts. The only way to solve this, the best way for everybody, would for everybody to get involved and have a voice. And that's
Yeah,
something I think you really, that point you drove home.
yeah, definitely. Look, we're not going to answer, we're not going to be able to solve everything, but we can at least understand what they are and start to mitigate and plan for how to address those. The other point is, a lot of folks will say, well, not in my, not here, not here. Um, the hard part is that it is here, right? And so what do we do now? Folks, may or may not have supported the housing tax that went in, but there's significant funding there that's available. And so either we engage and use those funds to try to improve the situation that is here, or we don't, right? But the funds are going to get spent somewhere. They're not going to give us back if we don't use them. It's not going to go back to the taxpayers of we didn't spend this. It's going to get used. So we might as well engage and use it to our benefit to improve our.
I want to touch on a little bit at the very pretty much end of 2023. We had an event honoring a lot of the staff employees the longevity, the service awards. And we had a couple people there, I think 20, 25 years with the city. And that really says something. But you, at the end of that, and then later at a commission meeting, talked about the staff, the work the staff does, and how appreciative you are of that customer service mentality that we really try to demonstrate on a daily basis. So let's kind of wrap up the podcast on a positive note and kind of speak to that a little bit.
Sure. No, yeah, I appreciate that. No, I think, the city commission, myself as the city manager, we tend to be the more visible parts of our community government that most people see, right? And I've often said I get way more credit than I deserve and probably more blame than I deserve, right? But the only way that I'm successful in what I do as the administrative head of this organization and its 200 plus employees, as well as implementing the goals, the priorities of the commission and the community, is through the amazing work of our staff, right? Folks who come in here and do their jobs and do it really, really well, focusing on public service and providing for our community in the best way that they can, is how we've been so successful. I often talk about, if you think about what we do on a daily basis, I don't know if, most people probably don't know, right? Keeping the water running, dealing with sanitary sewer, stormwater, police, parks and recreation, the library, community development, planning, building inspecting, just this plethora of services. And we have thousands and thousands of contacts with our citizens and community members. And the vast majority, an unbelievable percentage of those, go really, really well. Like, people are really appreciative of those services, really appreciative of the interaction, really appreciative of our staff going above and beyond to address a concern or communicate with the public, right? And that's a testament to our staff. It's a testament to their customer service skills, their willingness and their desire to do what they do really well to make Oregon City just an amazing and great place to live.
I think that really clarifies something because, as you said, the vast majority of those interactions go very well. People have positive things to say, and it's a truth in the customer service industry, and this is, in all reality, it is a customer service industry as well, that people are 10 times more likely to share a negative experience than they are a positive one. And let's magnify that or multiply that by about 100 when you look at social media.
Sure.
Social media is a dumpster fire. I can say that I've been doing it for 20 years since Facebook wasn't even a thing yet. Mm-hmm. And people love to go on there and complain. Mm-hmm. But the sheer number of positive, supportive comments that came through on our social channels during the storm on how our teams were working, how much they're working, trying to keep everything open as much as possible, that I think is a testament to how hard everybody in this city works. And people don't even necessarily sometimes forget or remember that a lot of these people live here too. This is their community as well. and they are working to help their own community. And a lot of residents really see that. And I think that is something really exciting and heartwarming to see. And I'm glad to be a part of it. And I know you're glad to kind of be the manager of it.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Like I said, can't say enough about the staff who work here, their commitment, their work ethic. It's not just about getting the job done, it's getting it done well and in a way that is, the least impact on our community members that are here. So yeah, no, I'm excited. I think, for the amount of work we do, the size of the projects, the vast majority of them go very, very well.
On that, we're going to wrap things up. Tony, I want to thank you for the time today. I appreciate you coming in and basically sharing the speech again a second time.
Sure.
And thank you for listening. This is Inside City Hall, the official podcast of the Oregon City. We will be back with another episode in a couple weeks, so thank you for tuning in.